clearly I'm not as popular as Martha Lane Fox, but then I'm not surprised. Welcome, and thank you very, very much for inviting me here, for those of you from the NHS. I think it's just as well that I'm coming on after David Nicholson. He's done why design. I want to do a little bit on how design. And design for innovation, it's not a new movement. It's not justice for victims. It's really, this is all about the role of design in innovation. And I'm going to talk briefly about four things. This image actually is a metaphor, if you like, for innovation. I chose it. It was invented by Bartle Bogle Hegarty, an advertising agency in London, and that black sheep for me is a sort of metaphor of disruptive innovation. The black sheep, sort of not the errant sun, but more the free thinker rowing against the tide. But I'm going to talk about a little bit about benchmarking, a little bit about picking an example, a global example of great design and innovation, and then a couple of spotlights on two projects that we've run with the NHS, one which is all about co-creation and the other which is about open innovation. And then I thought I might finish with some ideas about how we keep innovation going in the system. So benchmarking. So who to choose? An idea, a company that really represents great global innovation, that a great organisation like the NHS would or could benchmark itself against. Well, I was thinking about this last week when I was on my way to the award scheme for design and advertising. They're the sort of global Oscars, and one that I know well because I ran it for a number of years. And the idea came to me of who we might talk about. And it's an organisation that's actually won more design awards from this organisation, D&AD, than any other in the world. They're also in the top 5 for innovation globally in the Fast Company list, next to Google and Team Obama. So they are, of course, Apple, the company that actually made took the line, think different, and made it its own identity. And I thought, let's just have a look. This was from 1997, and let's just have a look at that little movie, the film that they made at that time, and see what it tells us, perhaps, about innovation.
Here's for the crazy ones. The misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Well, I think there are two very interesting things going on with this little film, and they say a lot to us. One is fairly straightforward. It was a little bit of business strategy from Apple. This was a company that at the time was a fairly small organisation in relative terms to the big behemoths like Dell and IBM, and so sort of aligning themselves with the lone genii was quite clever. But I think there's something else that's quite interesting here, and this is a very popular ad. If you look at YouTube, you'll see it gets millions and millions of downloads still. And I think what's interesting is when little films like this are played a lot and are very popular, it's usually because there's some sort of little truth in there. And I think what's being played out here is a story about creativity and innovation. And if you go to that sort of textbook, or you know, the textbook definition of creativity, It's that creativity is the generation of ideas, and innovation is the exploitation of ideas. And actually what I think is going on here is that Apple are paying homage to the genii, because actually they're a great innovation company. And I just want to give you that little bit of history before we move on to some of those stories from the NHS, really to prove my point. Does anybody know what was so special about this computer? Because this was the first computer that Apple launched, not the Mac actually, it was called the Lisa. And anybody any ideas what was really special about it? The mouse and exactly, the GUI, it was called, the graphical user interface, or, clicking on the screen to you and I. But that was what was so remarkable about Apple. That's what made them great. That was the innovation story. But the interesting thing is, the idea came from Xerox, from the Palo Alto Research Center. And actually, the innovation, the great idea of the mouse and the graphical user interface was staring the management of Xerox in the face, but they didn't pick it up. And it took Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, to pick up on the idea and run with it. And actually what's really interesting to follow through with Apple is, actually if you look at them in history terms, they've continued to do this. That's what's made them very unique as an innovation organization. Take the iPod. They didn't invent the MP3 player, but they've sold 2 billion of them. And, that's something which, Walkman had the whole market. And same with the iPhone. I mean, really, should they be dominating phone sales at the moment when there was Nokia and Motorola in the market? And I think that there are 3 things which I'm going to pick up on in my talk, which are very unique here, which I think are great symptoms of innovation in this company and also in many other great innovation companies. And the first is, and we've heard a lot about it here today, strong leadership. And there's a very interesting little bit of control in the Apple story, which is Steve Jobs set up the company, it went on the up, he left the company, it went down, he then came back, and whoomph, it went up again. Strong leadership. The second, clearly, is good design. And here, Steve Jobs appointed a vice president of design into his organization. And it's not just Johnny Ive, great designer, British designer actually, not just because he designs the objects well, but because he's designing the whole experience and the service. And it's all about releasing the creativity as well. And that's my third point, which is power to the people. That actually this is a company that understood that this is all about releasing the creativity of people within the organization, but also of the users themselves. And of course, we all put our lists together and we do all the wonderful things on these gizmos. So I want to move on to my first story, which we've worked on with you, which is about co-creation. And this is on the subject of diabetes. 5% of the NHS budget, after all, and growing, so a big issue as we've been hearing about. And here to tell us a little bit more about it is Angela. And Angela was part of our extended design team, but as you'll hear, she's actually a diabetic, she's a user.